I want to start off this week's video with a bit of a thought experiment. So pretend that it's 2019. It's 3 years ago, and you check your inbox, and in your inbox, you get an email. And this email is from a person who claims to know how Wano is going to end. And so the email is essentially a bunch of bullet points that are spoilers. And so you start reading the spoilers and you find that Marco, despite saying that he wasn't going to show up to Wano, does in fact show up to Wano, and that the message that he was going to give Nekomamushi to deliver to Luffy was actually a message saying that he was going to show up anyway. Despite this though, the spoilers also say that Luffy and Marco are never actually going to interact in the entire arc, or at least you are not going to see them interact in the entire arc. The spoiler also goes on to say that Tama's double fruit power of manipulation, which kind of goes against the main theme of the series, which is freedom, is going to play a huge role in changing the tide in favor of the quote-unquote good guys. In fact, characters like Tama, Hyogoro, and some of the scabbards are going to be so relevant during the raid that they will actually end up getting more focus than Straw Hats like Brook and Usopp. In a somewhat related matter, we will be introduced to a brand new character in the beginning of the third act, whose existence was never mentioned or foreshadowed in any of the two previous acts. Now, due to a lack of clarity in regards to the character's gender, there will be a constant influx of thousands upon thousands of comments to debate the same issue, which will typically result in members of the fandom getting either shunned, insulted, or both. The spoilers also state that instead of seeing Big Mom use Advanced Conqueror's Haki against her actual enemies, which are Kid and Law during her main fight, what we will actually get will be Big Mom using Advanced Conqueror's Haki to completely knock out one of her declared allies. In addition, Big Mom's crew, with the exception of Perospero, will actually never make it into Wano in the first place due to failing to get to the top of the waterfall twice. On a similar note, Sunisha and a fleet of world government ships will make their way to the outskirts of Wano, only to linger there for a couple of chapters, and then eventually end up U-turning out of there without actually accomplishing anything significant. You keep reading and you learn that during his fight against Kaido, Luffy is able to get back up not once, not twice, but 4 times if you include the time where his Gear 4th runs out. But then Kaido, who was described and labeled by Oda as the world's strongest creature / strongest pirate, doesn't get back up once during his fight against Luffy. In addition, Luffy's double fruit will be revealed to be the mythical type Zoan of the Chosen One instead of a standard Paramecia, therefore making the Gorosei look pretty incompetent for not doing everything in their power to stop and crush Luffy in his tracks, given that they knew that one of the signs of this mythical Chosen One double fruit was that it would grant the user rubber powers. In terms of deaths occurring in the final act, Kinemon will survive getting brutally clubbed into the ground by Kaido, as well as getting stabbed from side to side, whereas Ashura Doji will die from a dynamite explosion, and Izo will be dying from a Shigan. So what would you think of that email? You know, it tells you about Shanks, tells you about Green Bull, and how the way they were handled was heavily influenced by the release date of Film Red. It tells you about how the introduction of Nidai Kitetsu doesn't really pay off in the arc itself. It mentions how, despite Luffy's power being described as the most ridiculous power in the world, Luffy's actual finisher against Kaido is pretty much a generic giant punch coated in Haki. So what would you have said? What would you have thought if you had read these spoilers back in 2019? Would you have believed them? Would you have sort of frowned at them? Would you kind of be confused? Wano, this last act of Wano has left me exhausted in a way that I've never felt before after reading a One Piece arc. Now, I understand that those feelings, my feelings regarding this last act of Wano are pretty much all on me. You know, I take responsibility over them. I take ownership over them. But I really needed to get this out. Now, if you honestly believe that this last act of Wano is the best possible work that Oda can deliver, if you honestly believe, like deep down inside, that this is the best that Oda can do, you're completely free to believe that, okay? It's okay. It's okay. If that's what you believe, that's what you believe. At the end of the day, all I'm really saying is that there were certain moments in this third and final act of Wano that made me feel like I was reviewing a Dementor. We're turning over a new leaf. Next chapter, we're starting a brand new arc. So it's a brand new wave of energy that you begin to feel. So I'm excited about that. I have very little to go on in terms of like, what's going to happen next. So I kind of like not knowing. I like that freshness that comes with the start of a brand new arc. Anyway, I haven't even touched this chapter. So on to the review. This week's cover shows Katakuri with his awakening, attempting to hit the Vinsmokes with his punches. It almost looks like he is connecting a punch. It looks like he was able to punch Ichiji in the face at least once before Caesar activated his double fruit power to gas the entire area. The chapter itself starts off with what appears to be, initially, an innocent recounting of the events that took place during the raid. And I believe the story is being told by the same professor, the same guy that they replaced Sarahebi with a couple of chapters ago. We then cut to a shot of Kinemon and Yamato aboard Dragon Form Momonosuke as they rush through the forest that Green Bull made on their way to meet the Straw Hats. And so this ends up triggering a sequence of flashbacks for Momonosuke that essentially encompass his entire character arc since meeting Luffy, which, as I mentioned last time, is very reminiscent of the Vivi situation in Alabasta, where she also thinks about her journey with the Straw Hats before saying goodbye to them at the coast. So if you notice, the flashback sequence kind of starts off with Momonosuke being unable to say his name to Kaido, and then the sequence kind of wraps up with him being able to say his name, declare who he is, despite being afraid. So externally, the circumstances in that scene and in the first scene are the exact same. But what's different is him. He's changed, he's grown, and so he's reacting differently now. And so it's a perfect snapshot of Momonosuke's character development. The thing that's kind of annoying about this scene, though, is that it's kind of asking me to believe that both Kinemon and Momonosuke are actually angry at Luffy. It just seems kind of forced to me, and I just don't have it in me to believe that. And speaking of things being forced, we get a shot of the Supernova captains and their quote-unquote rivalry. I like how Sanji is wearing a shirt that says taco on it, because taco in Japanese means octopus. So it's kind of a reference to the very beginning of the Wano arc, where the Straw Hats that were about to enter the country ran into a very peppy octopus. Now, one of the things that I said last time was that it was pretty much essential, a necessity for us to see Carrot in this chapter, because if she was going to stay behind in Zou as ruler of Zou, we needed to get an explanation as to how that aligned at all with Pedro's will. And so, suspiciously enough, we don't get to see Carrot in this chapter at all. Instead, in the scene where Momonosuke barges out of the forest to pretend to attack Luffy, we actually see a bunch of wooden crates, bunch of wooden boxes and barrels next to the ship. And so this takes us back to Carrot's behavior after Zou, where she decided to sneak aboard the Sunny, which, by the way, could also be seen as a reference to Inuarashi and Nekomamushi's behavior when they decided to sneak aboard Whitebeard's ship and the Odo Jackson as well to follow Odin on his journey. Now, what's interesting here is that if Carrot is in fact aboard the Sunny, since Yamato decided to stay in Wano in this chapter, the whole thing would be kind of an inversion of what happened with Roger, where Odin actually decides to go with Roger to Laugh Tale, but the Minks decide to stay behind in Wano. Now, before I read this chapter, I was going to say that I don't really have a horse in this race anymore in regards to Yamato versus Carrot joining. But now, after reading this chapter, I'm actually kind of warming up to the idea of Carrot joining. If Carrot joins, like if Carrot is on the ship, that would be such a cool move narratively. And the reason for that is because Carrot joining technically makes sense, but it's also a surprise at the same time. Like, ever since Wano started, Carrot sort of became the underdog in regards to joining the crew, but she never really stopped being a candidate for the position. So I like surprises that make sense. And so if Carrot ends up joining, I can sort of look at Wano and be like, okay, this effort to keep Carrot out of the spotlight was completely deliberate from Oda. It was intentional. He wanted us to forget about Carrot so that we wouldn't suspect her sneaking aboard the Sunny, if that's what she ends up doing. And the thing that Carrot has always sort of had over Yamato in regards to joining the crew is that Carrot doesn't disrupt the power dynamic of the monster trio. So if Carrot is aboard the Sunny, I'm okay with that. It's fine. It makes narrative sense. It's a surprise that makes sense. And I enjoy being surprised by things that make sense. You know, what's funny is that because of Yamato not joining, people have been saying that you could technically fit in Film Red in the chronology of the series by placing it after Wano, before whatever arc is next. because Yamato is not in film red, right? Neither are the samurai, neither are the people from Wano. So if that's the case, though, if Carrot is inside of the Sunny, and Uta turns the Sunny into Sunny-kun with her devil fruit powers, then wouldn't that mean that Carrot spends a part of film red hiding inside of Sunny-kun's butthole? Alright, so now that I've talked about Carrot, I can go ahead and talk about Yamato. And to do that, I want to start off with an analogy. So do you remember in math class when the teacher would tell you, show your work, right? When you turn in an assignment, when you turn in your homework or a test, you have to show your work. You need to be able to show the process that got you to the result. Because even though the result is important, it's pretty much equally as important to show that you know how to get from the question, from the first equation, all the way to the final answer. Now, in Yamato's case, the process is sort of off-screened. Apparently there was a conversation to clarify things between Yamato and Luffy, but we never actually got to see that. The only thing we got as readers throughout this act was the impression that Yamato really wanted to set sail with the Straw Hats. Also, Yamato's argument for staying behind in Wano is actually kind of flawed as well, and I'm gonna tell you why. So basically, the reasoning that Yamato gives for staying behind is the following. Yamato says, Oden started his travels by walking about the country, so I'll follow the same path. So let me tell you why Yamato's reasoning for wanting to stay in Wano is complete bullshit. I actually have the chapter right here. It's chapter 964. In the chapter, Whitebeard tells Oden, if you want to set sail, do it by yourself. And Oden says that the only reason he hasn't been able to leave Wano, the only reason he's been staying in Wano for as long as he has, is because he sucks at sailing. He has no skill when it comes to navigating. That's it. Oden says, I can't navigate my way out of Wano. Every time I try, I end up back here. So I just suck. I have no skill for navigation. That's Oden. Yamato has access to arguably the best navigator in the entire One Piece world. But apparently staying behind to have a picnic in the labor camps of Udon is just much more important. This last section of the Wano arc has been the section of never mind, bye, Green Bull shows up. Never mind, bye, Shanks shows up. Never mind, bye, Sunisha. Never mind, bye, world government ships. Same thing. Kiku, your brother died. Never mind, bye, Hawkins, you believe in the fortune of the cards. Never mind, permanent bye, because he actually died. And thanks to this chapter, Yamato joins the club. Momonosuke ends up pulling a Kobe face in this chapter, and I feel like the parallels, the connections between Momo and Kobe in this chapter are pretty obvious. Like, there's a line that Luffy has in this chapter where he says, wow, you're a coward and a moron. So it's essentially the same thing that he tells Kobe, and I think that both Kobe and Momonosuke, like, they're destined to have, like, pretty important political roles. Like, Kobe, like, I think will eventually become Fleet Admiral. And then, of course, according to the narrator in chapter 1051, Momonosuke will later be known around the world as the Great Shogun of Wano. So it's a similar amount of influence, a similar amount of friendship that Luffy has with both of these characters. Plus, the added bonus here is that Shanks saved both of them. Shanks typically shows up in this story to save the voices and the leaders of the future. We see Frankie in the background getting emotional over the goodbye with Momonosuke, and then Luffy asks Usopp for a flag with the Straw Hat Jolly Roger. Because if you remember, Usopp is also the artist of the crew. Oda at one point said that if Usopp had a real-life job, he would be a graphic designer. And so he's the one responsible for creating the Straw Hat Jolly Roger in the first place. So he hands Luffy the flag to give to Momonosuke. Luffy then kind of gives an explanation to Momo about what the flag means, what it represents, which kind of reminds me of the speech that he gave back in Drum Island. And then we get a panel of Momonosuke tearing up, which again, completely reminds me of the Vivi goodbye, where she's essentially asking, you know, if we ever meet again, will you still call me friend? And he also ends up bowing down there as well, just like his dad did. Or it could also be interpreted as a Sanji goodbye at the Baratie thing as well. Now, by the end of the chapter, we get a shot of Momonosuke sort of thinking about or questioning where he should hang that giant Jolly Roger, that giant Straw Hat flag. And so I feel like there's actually just two places where you could hang that flag. The first one is that giant tree that we see above the palace. And then the second option would be to wait for Pluton to get revived and then eventually put the flag on Pluton. Regardless, though, I feel like putting the flag up in Wano not only symbolizes that Wano is under Luffy's protection, but it also symbolizes that Wano, in a way, is sort of Luffy's territory. So it kind of falls into the pattern of Yonko's claiming and having territories in the New World. And what I think is cool about that is that the two territories that Luffy has claimed to be under his protection both have ancient weapons. So he claimed Fishman Island, that's where Poseidon is, and now Wano is under his protection as well. And that's where Pluton is. We get a brief shot of the crew, and the way that Nami is dressed aboard the Sunny really reminds me of the way that Gerd dresses, you know, the giant from Elbaf. It's the same sort of style that they have going on there, which brings me to a correction that I have to make, because last time I said that this was the map that the supernovas would be following, except I ended up checking the Japanese names for the islands, and it turns out that Hashinosu and Elbaf are switched. So this right here is actually the correct version of the map. So unless Oda just decides to completely ignore the map in the magazine altogether, then Sphinx Island stays the same, which is the direction that Luffy and his crew are supposed to be traveling towards. Law would be the one headed to Elbaf first in this case, and then Hashinosu is the island in the middle that Kid won the draw on. So if Oda does in fact decide to follow the magazine, these should be the routes, these should be the directions for the islands that are up ahead. Aboard each of their respective ships, the supernovas leap off of the waterfall, and as they do so, the narrator at the school play, or like this play venue, continues his story. If you take a close look at the audience members there, you'll find Panda Man. He looks like he has his arms crossed. And so the way the chapter is structured is that it's sort of building up towards a crescendo, to this climactic scene between Kurozumi Orochi and Hiyori. Now I know that in another translation, the line that is said before Orochi burns to death caused an outrage. So the way the dialogue read, the way the dialogue was translated in those translations said, the Kurozumi were born to burn. In the official translation, it's not plural, it's singular, and it basically says Kurozumi, which is a pun because Kurozumi means coal. So it says Kurozumi was born to burn. Now here's the thing. Despite the change from plural to singular, despite the fact that I know that it's a pun on Kurozumi meaning coal, despite the fact that I know that it's also a reference to Odin's line about Odin being born to boil, despite those things, I still think that this line is incredibly tone deaf, and I still think that it should not have been in this chapter. See, the reason the line works for Odin is because when Odin says it, he's appropriating it. Okay, he's saying like, okay, yeah, I'm Odin. My name is Odin. It was born to boil. It's fun. It's sort of a thing that I embrace. In fact, those are actually his last words, right? When he's in this pot of oil, he actually starts the chant himself. So in a way, he's kind of giving people permission to embrace the pun. Now, the reason the pun completely falls flat in regards to Orochi, even if it is Orochi, is because Orochi belongs to a lineage of a group of people, aka the Kurozumi, who were actively discriminated throughout history to the point of being murdered despite not committing a crime themselves whatsoever. Basically, the story goes like this. Orochi's grandfather tried to become the shogun by killing the other daimyo, and then he was forced to commit seppuku because of that. So the evil grandfather was brought to justice, and then the Kurozumi name, the Kurozumi lineage, began getting antagonized all throughout Wano. Eventually, this leads to outright discrimination against the Kurozumi clan, and this leads to the birth of both Orochi and Kanjiro's mentality of wanting to get revenge on the people of Wano. So the circle of hate, with lines like this, you can definitely see that the circle of hate is going to continue. So if we ever go back to Wano, I wouldn't be surprised if we find that there's an actual civil war going on inside. To the point where a part of me wants to think that that line is tone deaf on purpose, because maybe it's setting up a future conflict that will be addressed with bringing like true peace, you know, for the people of Wano so that they can accept the Kurozumi. But the thing is that there's no awareness of the sense of irony in that scene. Like there's nobody there kind of looking at that and being like, yeah, that line was kind of weird, wasn't it? Like, isn't that the sort of mentality that got us into the mess that we were just in? We know Tama is pretty much a Kurozumi. Some fans actually looked at her flashback and read the names on the tombstones of her parents. It's chapter 1051. Some Japanese fans read the names on the tombstones and they figured out that, you know, it says Kurozumi there. And so what's interesting, or what's heartbreaking about that, is if you remember, Tama's parents were forced to work in the Udon camps, right? and they died, of exhaustion. And we know that the people that were sent to the camps in the first place were the people that opposed Kaido and Orochi. So Kurozumi, these people, Tama's parents, were good people. They opposed Kaido and Orochi's rule. They got sent to the camps and they died. So the circle of hate doesn't really get resolved by the end of the arc. All we get is this Oscar night picture to sort of commemorate the end of the final act. And so I really do hope that this is a plot point that Oda addresses at some point. I think he will, because world peace is one of the things that is on his mind. I think that's the true nature of the One Piece, to bring people together. And so the way the narrative thread is sort of left hanging in the air like this, it kind of does, a part of me does question, what were we fighting for, No, you know what? I know that this is going to be addressed. It has to be addressed. I don't believe that Oda's going to leave this hanging. It's too much of a thing. It's too big of an important thing to just leave like this. On a similar note, I guess we'll see Zoro visiting Ryuma's grave at some point in the future in a flashback during his fight against Shiryu or something. Surprisingly, I've been sort of enjoying the Uta episodes in the anime. One of the eye catchers revealed what Shanks' bounty was during the time that he was frequenting Luffy. And then the episodes also add a little bit of more insight to the characters as well. So for example, there was a conversation between Shanks and Makino where they both appear to be talking about Luffy and Uta's relationship, but if you read between the lines, it's pretty obvious that they're actually referring to their own feelings towards each other, as well as the secret relationship that they have going on. The episodes also kind of explain Luffy's obsession for wanting to get a musician on his crew from very early on. And it turns out that Uta is also the one that kind of plants the idea of changing the world for the better in Luffy's mind. So we get a conversation that hints at what Luffy's secret dream is, because Uta asks Luffy, what are you going to do after you become a pirate? And so the anime kind of reveals that this is where the idea or the dream beyond becoming Pirate King begins to be planted into Luffy's head, because it's not just about being free, it's also about changing the world for the better. And then finally, there's a scene where Ben Beckman rescues Luffy, and it looks like he's using Conqueror's Haki to do so. So there you go, Ben Beckman, Conqueror's Haki user confirmed, which probably means that he could also use the advanced version of it as well, just like Zoro. Then after that, there's a brief scene of him carrying Luffy under the full moon. I think it was a Vivri card that said that if Shanks is like the sun, then Beckman is essentially like the moon. And so those two things kind of strengthen Ben's parallel and connection to Zoro, right? Zoro being the first mate and being a Shimotsuki having the word moon in it, and then both Ben and Zoro having Conqueror's Haki as well. So yeah, the recent anime episodes seem to be adding some insight to the core story. And that is going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Again, brand new beginning next week, brand new arc. Excited for that. Have a great rest of the day. Have a great week. Catch you guys later. Take care. Bye.